Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to combine the questions for both of the two speakers. So we're going to go on immediately to our next speaker, who is one of the other founding members of the Basic Income, now Earth Network, way back in 1986, and has been a tireless campaigner for basic income since, and also possibly the most prolific author in the history of the basic income movement. He's written more books than many people have read, including The Precariat, The New and Dangerous Class. On my left, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Guy Standing.
Thank you. It makes me sound very old, so I will skip all further introductions. I'd like to compliment what Philippe has been saying, with which I obviously have strong agreement. And I want to make really three types of comment. The first is linked to the precariat, which I think is an important entry point for our debates. I think we must avoid the trap of situating basic income in a debate about income poverty. We tend to play into the hands of a very narrow discussion that isn't particularly challenging or emancipatory. And I think we need to make sure all the time that we situate the debate, as we've been trying to do in the past 28 years, as a question of emancipation, a question of social justice, and a question of building a new distribution system for the global economy. And we must constantly emphasize that point. And we must also remember that we cannot de-link the discussion of basic income from the whole process of social and political struggle. The question of struggle for a better society is intimately linked to our debates. And it's a struggle against neoliberalism, and it's a necessary part of our discussion that we must build agency for basic income, as the sociologist would describe it. And therefore, we must see it in terms of relating to the emerging global class structure of inequality and insecurities that are taking place in a context of a global transformation, a Polanyian global transformation, in which millions and millions of people are no longer citizens, they are denizens, losing all forms of rights. And I think this loss of rights is a contextual part of our discussion. And the discussion of citizenship this morning didn't deal with the erosion of rights that's been taking place, that has actually transformed the context of citizenship. Now, we must also remember that, as a number of speakers wanted us to do this morning, basic income is also intimately linked to the technological revolution that is taking place. And I slightly resent those people who think that we haven't been integrating this technological change into the thinking around basic income over the last few years. It's been fundamentally central to it. And what we see, in fact, is that as a result of globalization and technological change, a tiny, tiny plutocracy has been gaining a growing proportion of total global income. And we have to see basic income as one mechanism for dealing with that predicament of the plutocracy and salariat gaining all of it up here and the precariat losing it all down here. We also must realize that as part of the neoliberal experiment, we have seen a thinning of democracy, a commodification of democracy, which has profoundly altered the context in which the next point I want to make is so fundamental. Because with the thinning of democracy and the systematic dismantling of all institutions of social solidarity, which is central to the neoliberal project, the precariat and others have lost voice. And it's so important to combine a strengthening of basic income with a strengthening of voice. A vulnerable person given a basic income will stay vulnerable the next day unless there is a collective, organized capacity to resist and a strength of resilience and bargaining power. So we must be aware of not falling into the trap of presenting basic income as a panacea, a one single policy. It must be part of a broad package of reforms. And that is why the book that's just published today, I've tried to situate basic income as in part of a charter of demands that we need to make. Now, the second point I want to make, and I've got to make it very quickly because Carl will start waving pieces of paper at me, is that I want to make just a small plea to all of us not to set up, oh good, I've got 10, not to set up too many new structures. I know the temptation always to have new structures to deal with different dimensions. But all of us have limited organizational energies and limited capacities. So I plead with us to keep to the structure that we have built over the past 28 years of having an umbrella organization and strong national networks. Build strong national networks and be part of a broad family. There are good reasons why we changed bien from the basic income European network to the basic income Earth network in Barcelona in 2004. And I do plead that we should think very carefully before setting up alternative structures. And that leads to my third theme. Pilots. That's what I was asked to talk about. And it's very close to my heart. I must say that pilots, I believe, are a way of legitimizing our agenda. They are powerful, but they have limitations. And unless anybody is thinking of rushing out and doing some pilots, and there are several in the room who have been talking about it, let me warn you in advance. They are damned hard work. I've occupied 8 years of my life, sometimes with nightmares, doing pilots. I may have learned a lot and may have made a lot of mistakes, but they're damned hard work. The Namibia pilot was path-breaking. I won't talk about the results. Those of you who wish to see them can see them. They're good for nutrition, good for schooling, good for health, good for women's status, but it had certain limitations. Because we didn't do a control experiment, we only had one area, but it was path-breaking because we were experimenting. The pilots that we've been doing in India, we've also made mistakes. But we've been providing thousands of people with an unconditional basic income. Each woman, each man has been given the same amount each month. And we have been monitoring the effects by comparing what happened before with what happened during and what happened after they were receiving the basic income, and with other people in other villages who weren't receiving a basic income. But what is unique about this experiment is that we deliberately compared areas where there was a voice, a collective body representing the villagers to ensure that they had bargaining power, with other areas where there was no voice. There was no collective organization. We worked with SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, which is essentially a precariat body. Now, I could emphasize all the results. We've got this draft report, which is going to be finalized. As you see, it's very long. It's got a huge amount of data. We'll have an international conference in December in Delhi, and a number of people in this room, including 2 people on the rostrum, are being invited. And we hope that the book that will come out of it will be published at that time. I'm not going to have time, I've got 5 minutes, to mention any of the results beyond 3. The first result, which brings tears to my eyes, is that we weighed and measured all the babies and children in the villages before we started. Then after 6 months, when they'd had the basic income for 6 months, we went back and did the same. And then after another 6 months, we did it again. And each time we did the WHO Z-score, which should be a normal distribution. I was going to show a PowerPoint, but we don't have enough time. A normal distribution of weight for age for children, right? And in impoverished areas, it is skewed to the left. So the distribution is all malnourished children. And in Indian villages, girls are much more skewed to the left. Malnourishment is much greater for girls than for boys. At the end of a year, the normal distribution had practically come. But what Mozart is playing in my ears is when I see the curve of the Z-score for girls getting better than boys. That was wonderful to see that. And it was basically because you got an individual amount given to the mothers, given to the fathers, given to the children. The second thing that I want to emphasize, among the 190 things I could, not quite as many as Philippe's points earlier, is that we asked people at the beginning, before they started basic income, would you prefer a basic income or an equivalent amount in subsidized goods and services? It was about half and half. After 6 months, it was huge number would prefer the basic income than the subsidized equivalent. And after 12 months, we had difficulty finding anybody who wanted the subsidized alternatives. The third thing I want to mention is that we looked at the impact on work. And I plead with you all, I've done it 1,000 times with singularly little effect, is that we must reconceptualize what we mean by work. Labor that you do in a job is not the only form of work. And the great joy about basic income is it would tilt the values towards the values of work, reproductive work, care work, away from resource-using labor. And what we've seen in these villages is a wonderful shift away from casual wage labor to own account work, care work, community work, participation in the life of the villages. There's no reason why what we've observed in India should be any different anywhere else. It's a part of regaining control over time. But there is one remaining puzzle, and I hope Carl will allow me to cite it, because I've never said this in public before, so I wanted to see if I get it right. When we were sitting in the villages, I said to myself, why is it that the effects of a small basic income seem much bigger than the amount we're giving? Why is this? Could it be a multiplier effect? Could it be a confidence effect? I said, no, it doesn't explain it. What is really the case is that the emancipatory value of the basic income is greater than the monetary value. And I've explained it in this book, which is about the precariat, because it's the same problem for the precariat. Those of you who are economists here may know of the Lauderdale paradox. If there is a scarce commodity in a community, rent seekers will use that scarce commodity to increase their exploitation of people in society, through debt, through money lending, through whatever. If you provide a basic income, you weaken the rent seekers and you strengthen the individual so that the value of their money is actually enhanced. And we've documented this in the books, and I think it's a powerful additional factor in our arguments for a basic income. Thank you very much for listening.